Media 900 AM 96.1 FM. Aaron Smith, rapping professor. Queen Kawesa, super producer, put some respect on her name. And hopefully at this wellness event on December 1st, I guess give more information. I've been researching this black seed oil. So for all those people who know what's up with the health benefits of black seed oil, I am definitely a believer and would love to talk with some of the wellness people in the community about. So if you see me, be like, hey brother, I know about that black seed oil. It's really good for everything. It take care of everything. Yeah, it's almost up there with turmeric and a couple other things. It's just chlorophyll, turmeric, and black seed oil. That's probably my top 3 right now. People always ask about energy and you know what I'm eating, so I'm definitely getting that on a regular basis. Black seed oil, turmeric, and chlorophyll. So that's the holy trinity. Grass fed. At this time, we have the year Du Bois. If you want to call up and have a question about Du Bois or something about the literature, on topic, and we're gonna make sure we stay on topic in the new year, y'all. We're gonna have more structure. So I feel bad for my venting and my trolls, but for the callers, we're gonna have, staying on topic is gonna be our New Year's resolution here on the morning show. So we're gonna start right now with the year Du Bois. 215-634-8065, 215-634-8065, and toll free. If you're on a payphone. No, I'm just kidding. I'm like toll free. 866-361-0900. Again, toll free. 866-361-0900. Dr. Anthony Montero.
Thank you very much. How are y'all doing today?
Doing good.
Fine. Listen, in 1960, Du Bois was 92 years old and still vigorous and still committed to his principles. He goes to Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte, North Carolina, a historically black university. And he speaks there on the question of whither now and why. Where are we going now and why? And he's speaking at the 25th convention of the black teachers of the social sciences. And I'd like to read from that today. A year and a half after he gives this speech, he leaves the United States to go to Ghana, where he will spend the last years of his life. He was invited there by the first president of the independent nation of Ghana, Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah. But let's listen to this. The American Negro has now reached a point in his progress where he needs to take serious account of where he is and whither he is going. This day has come much earlier than I had thought it would. I wrote in 1940 a book called Dusk of Dawn, in which I sought to record our situation in a period of change which I expected to last for another 50 years. But the Second World War and the rise of socialism and communism have hastened the event, and we are definitely approaching now a time when the American Negro will become in law equal in citizenship to other Americans. There's much hard work yet to be done before the Negro becomes a voter, before he has equal rights to education, and before he can claim complete civil and social equality. Yet, this situation is in sight, and it brings not as many assume an end to the so-called Negro problem, but a beginning of even more difficult problems of race and culture. Because what we must now ask ourselves is, when we become equal American citizens under the law, what will be our aims and ideals, and what will we have to do with selecting those aims and ideals? Are we to assume that we will simply adopt the ideals of Americans and become what they are or what they want to be, and that we will have in this process no ideals of our own? That would mean that we would cease to be black as such and become white in action, if not completely in color. We would take on the culture of white Americans, doing as they do and thinking as they think. Manifestly, this would not be satisfactory. Physically, it would mean that we would be integrated with Americans, losing, first of all, the physical evidence of color and hair and racial type. We would lose our memory of Negro history and of those racial peculiarities which have long been associated with the Negro. We would cease to acknowledge any greater tie with Africa than with England or Germany. We would not try to develop Negro music and art and literature as distinctive and different, but allow them to be further degraded, as is the case today. We would always, if possible, marry lighter-hued people so as to have children who are not identified with the Negro race, and thus solve our racial problem in America by committing racial suicide. More or less clearly, this possibility has been in the minds of Negroes in the past, although not assented to by all. Some have stated it and welcomed it. Others have simply assumed that this development was inevitable and therefore nothing could be done about it. This is the reason that my Pan-African movement, which began in 1900 when I cooperated with a meeting in London, and definitely was started in 1919 in the first Pan-African Congress in Paris, could get but little support and cooperation among American Negroes. Most of them resented it as being a back to Africa movement. Others simply said we had problems enough in America without taking on the insoluble problems of Africa. Today, when the African people are rising to settle their own problems, we are in peculiar position of being in a group of persons of Negro descent who not only cannot help the Africans, but in most cases do not want to. Any statement of our desire to develop American Negro culture, to keep up our ties with colored people, to remember our past, is being regarded as racism. I, for instance, who have devoted my life to efforts to break down racial barriers, am being accused of desiring to emphasize differences of race. This has a certain truth about it. As I have said before, and I repeat, I am not fighting to settle the question of racial equality in America by the process of getting rid of the Negro race, getting rid of black folk, not producing black children, forgetting the slave trade and slavery and the struggle for emancipation, of forgetting abolition, and especially of ignoring the whole cultural history of Africans in the world. No. What I have been fighting for and am still fighting for is the possibility of black folk and their cultural patterns existing in America without discrimination and on terms of equality. If we take this attitude, we have got to do so consciously and deliberately. This brings up a number of difficult problems which we will have to solve and make definite preparations for such solutions. Take, for instance, the current problem of the education of our children. By the law of the land today, they should be admitted to the public schools. If and when they are admitted to these schools, certain things will inevitably follow. Negro teachers will become rarer and in many cases will disappear from the public schools. Negro children will be instructed in the public schools and taught under unpleasant, if not discouraging, circumstances. Even more largely than today, they will fall out of school, cease to enter high school, and fewer will go to college. Theoretically, Negro universities will disappear. Negro history will be taught less or not at all. And as in so many cases in the past, Negroes will remember their white or Indian ancestors and quite forget their Negro forebearers. To some folks, this type of argument would lead to the conclusion that we ought to refuse to enter the white schools or to clamor for unsegregated schools. In other words, that we ought to give up the fight against color discrimination. I want, however, to emphasize that this not only is unnecessary but impossible. We must accept equality or die. What we must also do is to lay down a line of thought and action which will accomplish two things: the utter disappearance of color discrimination in American life and the preservation of African history and culture as a valuable contribution to modern civilization. To do this is not easy. It calls for intelligence, cooperation, and careful planning. It would meet head-on the baffling difficulties that face us today. Here, for instance, is the boy who says simply he is not going to school. His treatment in the white schools, even if he is admitted, is such that it does not attract him. Moreover, the boy who does enter the white school and gets on reasonably well does not always become a useful member of the black group. Negro children educated in integrated schools and northern colleges often know nothing of Negro history, know nothing of Negro leadership, and doubt if there ever have been leaders in Africa, the West Indies, and the United States who equal white folk. Some are ashamed of themselves and their people. They regard the study of Negro biography and the writing of Negro literature as a vain attempt to pretend that Negroes are really the equals of whites. That tends to be the point of view of those of our children who are educated in white schools. There are going to be schools which do not discriminate against colored people, and the number is going to increase slowly in the present, but rapidly in the future. Until long before the year 2000, there will be no school segregation on the basis of race. The deficiency in knowledge of Negro history and culture, however, will remain, and this danger must be met or else Americans will disappear culturally. Their history and culture will be lost. Their connections with the rising African world will be impossible. What then can we do, or should we try to do? Negro communities, Negro private schools, Negro colleges will and must be organized and supported. This racial organization will be voluntary and not compulsory. It will be non-discriminatory. It will be carried on according to definite objects and ideals, and will be open to all who share this ideal. And of course, that ideal must always be in accord with the greater ideals of humanity. But what American Negroes must remember is that voluntary organization for great ends is far different from compulsory segregation for evil purposes. Then he continues, the great American world of which we have for centuries been striving to become a part of, and which has risen to be one of the most powerful nations, is today losing its influence, and that American Negroes do not realize this. There was a time when, as leader of a new democracy, as believers in a new tolerance and religion, and as a people basing their life on equality of opportunity in the ownership of land and property, the United States of America stood first in the hopes of mankind. That day has passed. I took a trip recently that lasted nearly a year. I had already traveled widely. I had been to Europe 15 times. I had been to Asia. I had circled the world. Then for 9 years, I was imprisoned in the confines of the United States by the unauthorized dictum of those who were ruling. From 1950 until 1958, I was not allowed to travel abroad. The reason was that I had cooperated with millions of men and women who wanted war to end. Even here, my actions had been simply to tell Americans that what was being done by other countries to promote peace. For this, I was accused of being an agent of a foreign government and ordered to admit this or go to jail. It cost me over $30,000, which would be something like $500,000 today, to defend myself in court against this absurd accusation. This sum I and my wife had to beg for from state to state. The court threw the case out for lack of proof. Despite this, I was refused a passport for travel abroad until the Supreme Court finally decided that the Department of State had no legal grounds to refuse me a passport. And then he ends. For decades now, they have made Americans believe that communism is a failure, that the Russian people and the people of Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and the Balkans were prisoners, enslaved in thought and action, that communism only needed our help to fall in ruin, that China is trying to conquer all of Asia. Despite all this propaganda, we are beginning now to realize some things that are clear. That the Soviet Union has made color prejudice illegal, that she has a system of education probably the best in the world and far superior to ours, that science there is forging ahead of anything that we have, and that people are not prisoners and are not asking our help in order to revolt. They are progressing at a rate superior to us in art, literature, and general happiness. If all this is true, it must be taught to our youth. It must be taught by teachers and instructors and professors. In that case, we must face the fact that these teachers may lose their jobs for what they teach and what they believe in. They can only be supported and employed if the bulk of American Negroes support institutions like the private Negro colleges. If the Negro or white colleges are going to depend on the gifts of the rich for support, they cannot teach the truth. If they are supported tomorrow, Negroes must give not a tenth, but a quarter of their income to support education and social organizations, and teachers must sacrifice to the last penny. I appeal to the members of this organization, first, to teach the truth as they see it, even if they lose their jobs, to study socialism and the philosophy of Karl Marx and his successors, to travel in the Soviet Union and China, and then to dare take a stand as they honestly believe, whether for or against communism, to refuse to listen to American propaganda without also listening to the propaganda of the other side, and to give up teaching and go to digging ditches before bowing to the new American slavery of thought. Above all, to do everything possible to stop war and preparation for war, which is the policy of the present rulers of this nation and their method of stopping socialism by force when they cannot stop it by work nor reason. Thank you very much.
We're going to take a quick break. Take a quick break and let you call in 215-634-8065 or toll free 866-361-0900. Again, this is the year in Du Bois, and you're waking up with Word with Aaron Smith, the rapping professor, Queen Quays, the super producer, and you're waking up with Word, y'all.
Looking for a delicious Sunday brunch? Enjoy an all-you-can-eat feast at Brown's ShopRite Island Avenue from 1 till 4 p.m. Delight in the buffet of delicious food each Sunday for only $15.99. Enjoy live entertainment, watch the games on the big screen, and remember, kids under 3 eat free. This weekly event will offer a variety of delicious food from the hot bar and the wok. If you're not full the first time, don't worry. Have all you can eat while enjoying the company of others. Sundays from 1 to 4 at Brown's ShopRite of Island Avenue. Reality Check with Charles Ellison.
This is Charles Ellison. On Thursday's edition of Reality Check, lawmakers get local. Letitia Beecham investigates the business of politics. We get global and your take on the news of the week. Don't miss it.
Don't miss Reality Check. Monday through Thursday, 4 p.m. till 7 p.m. Right here on Word Radio, 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD. Independent Black Media.
Real ID is coming. Are you ready? Real ID is a federal requirement that affects how all states issue driver's licenses and ID cards. After October 1, 2020, you will need a Real ID or another TSA-approved form of ID to board all flights or enter federal facilities that require ID. Real IDs will be available in spring 2019, but you can pre-verify now. It's easy. Learn how at penndot.gov/realid. Paid for with Pennsylvania taxpayer dollars.
You're listening to Wake Up with Word on Word Radio, 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD, Independent Black Media.
Independent Black Media, 900 AM, 96.1 FM, WURD, WURDradio.com. Listen live anytime and log on. If you don't have that app, you know where to go. Download an app like you know. On the road to the second annual Empowerment Experience is going to be a big deal. Make sure you are there. And at this time on the lines asking questions about Du Bois is Casa Who from North Philly.
Yes, good morning, brother.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I got a question about the labeling of Negro. When we got the labeling of the Negro, they were calling indigenous and so-called African people Negro. So when you use the word Negro, you really can't tell who you're talking about.
Well, let me say this. Let me interrupt you. Yes, you can. In the context of what he is saying, we know who he's talking about. And no one exists, and no one exists in a discursive context outside of the general social way of speaking. And that's who he's speaking to. We know who he's talking about. He would use different words at different times. He would refer to us as Africans. He would refer to himself as an African. And sometimes, let me finish. And sometimes when speaking of us, he uses the word colored peoples, thus connecting all of the peoples who are non-white of the world in a common struggle against colonialism and imperialism. So, I mean, we can nitpick and take ourselves away from the fundamental question that he's dealing with. And I don't think we should do that.
I don't want to argue, but I do have a question.
Go ahead.
The question is that you don't know who you're talking about when you mix all the labeling together.
Well, you don't know. Don't say you don't. You don't know. I know who he's talking about. His audience that he was speaking to at that time knew who he was talking about, and that was 1960. He could not just disregard how they thought and how they spoke in giving this speech.
Want to argue. I just want to put.
Well, thank you for your comments, brother. Appreciate you. We also have Dr. Eugene Williams from Clinton, Maryland on the line talking Du Bois. Thank you for waking up with Word.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Interesting discussion. I'm
Thank you.
enjoying it immensely. And you know what? The conversation that we're having now and what you read is what I shared with my wife just last evening. And so I have a suggestion, and I wonder how you feel about it. When we talk about Afro-American studies, what I'm finding, sir, is that if we're going to expect the schools to do what Mr. Du Bois would like the schools to be doing, we can forget it.
Yeah.
But I would say to Dr. Haidt there in Philadelphia, and I would say to the ministers there in Philadelphia, what cannot be done in the school and as far as teaching our youngsters who they are and from whence they came can be done by them. And so I hope that the ministers there in Philadelphia and all over New Jersey, all over, and educators such as Dr. Haidt will take this under consideration. And I hope that parents would also guide their youngsters, teach them who they are and what they are.
You know something? If I could just interrupt you.
Yes, sir.
You know, I don't have a lot of confidence in the likes of Dr. Haidt and others of that ilk to do the right thing. And I'll tell you why. See, what Du Bois was proceeding from was his framework that he first stated in 1897 in a famous essay called The Conservation of Races. And he said that we were a civilization in potentiality. He would later say that we are a nation within a nation, a people. And so he proceeds from that. He says, yes, we're in this nation and we have to fight for legal equality and political rights in this country to protect ourselves. But we don't have to bend to the culture of this nation. In fact, he says we must go against it. And he called for an international outlook where we join with what he called the darker nations of the world, both Pan-African and Pan-Asia. He felt the two could be joined. And that's where the difference lies, in a type of integrationist, sell out, give into the white world leadership that claims because they look like us that all of us are supposed to think like them.
So, sir, I want to ask you one other question, because the last time, I think last week, you talked about religion.
Yes.
And you talked about, he talked about it being such that it would repress us or cause us to rebel or cause us to submit.
Yeah.
I think that's what you read last week.
What did I read last week? I forget.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Some time ago anyway, I heard that, sir.
Mm-hmm.
And about the Bible and what have you, using the Bible, I contend that we need to do more with using the Bible.
Yes.
Have you read the Bible?
Yes. And you know, it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because he was very much in favor of the Old Testament prophets, Amos and Isaiah.
Yes.
You know, Amos, let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. But at the same time, he would write that he felt that Paul was not genuine. So he was an Old Testament type of guy, and he did believe in the prophetic traditions of Christianity, but more than anything, he believed in the black church and its African foundations. He talks extensively about this in the Philadelphia Negro, when he talks in particular about Mother Bethel AME Church, and he says the AME denomination is the greatest organization in the black world. But listen, we got to move on. I think we have some other callers, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Eugene Williams from Clinton, Maryland. We also have Anthony from Delaware. Thank you for waking up with Word.
Good morning, Montero. How are you?
All right, how are you, sir?
I love this show. Now, on behalf of WURD, I'm going to offer you a contract, a pilot series for a one-day-a-week show, 2 hours. And I was wondering, would you be interested in that?
Well, let's talk about that later. I don't know if I have time. Appreciate it.
You are brilliant.
Well,
brilliant. I love this show. Only thing, I just hate people. They don't want to learn. They want to argue with you. They want to divert the conversation. I hate that.
But that's okay. I welcome it. It's a good thing.
But it takes away from us.
Yeah, okay.
Now, about divorce, I know what you're talking about. They thought he was a traitor. People thought that, he lost his passport and all that. But he was just revealing the truth about Russia and other parts of the world that they didn't want, people to know about. This, and as I say, Russia, they didn't participate in none of that colonialism and none of that kind of stuff. And they don't want people to know that. They just want Russia to be known as, a suppressive country and the way they do things.
Well, if I could just interrupt you. See, what Du Bois was about was discovering the truth. That's why for most of his life he traveled. And in his 90s, his late 80s, he travels to China, to Western Europe. And then when he's 93, he goes to live in Ghana to take up work on the Encyclopedia of Africa. He saw black people, and he felt that black people had to know the world and to know what was coming in the future. And he saw the future not in capitalism, but in socialism. Now, what makes him different from so many other people is that he had the courage to stand up to the United States government. And like he says, they criminalized him. They took him to court. They took his passport, but he did not cease to speak the truth as he saw it. And that was him.
We also have Patrice from North Philly on the line. Patrice, thank you for waking up with Word.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sarah.
Good morning, Patrice.
Yes, I was calling because I have a comment and also a question. So my comment is I just want to thank you, Dr. Montero, for just being so committed with going out throughout the community and just keeping the work and the life of the great W.E.B. Du Bois alive.
Thank
because
you.
we need it. He's, been suppressed everywhere, I'd also want to encourage the audience also to listen because it's a 32-minute audio that's available for free, the Whither Now and Why essay that you can actually hear him. And, it's not a lot of audio of Du Bois. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing I think that is really sad that you can't, we can listen to Dr. King, we can listen to Paul Robeson and so many other great intellectuals, but you can search and sit forever and Google Du Bois and, you can find his writings, of course, and his essays and things of that. His books and stuff is available. But to hear him is something, that's so powerful. Mm-hmm. And like you say, Dr. Montero, you told me is emotional, and it is because you can actually hear the love that he has for black people, for humanity, and his struggle, for world peace. Mm-hmm. I guess my question, I know another caller earlier talked about, and I was thinking about, the state of public education.
Right.
I've worked in the schools, and I see that, you're definitely not going to get Du Bois in, public schools, and it needs to be. But I guess my question would be, Du Bois also was a supporter of the arts. Mm-hmm. And, utilizing art for revolutionary purposes. And if a curriculum can be, mm-hmm. And this may be a bigger question that you may not be able to get into now, but for public schools, for educators, people who,
right.
Work with youth,
right.
And to incorporate art and, because literature and reading, that's a part of art as well. That's a part of a curriculum. Where could educators begin?
Yes, that's so interesting that you bring that up. I'm going to be speaking at Lincoln University this Friday, and it's organized, what I'm going to say, around the essay by Du Bois called The Criteria of Negro Art, where he asked the question, what is black art? And this was at the height of the Harlem Renaissance that he wrote this. And what he says is that black art must be defined by its social and political objectives. Does it raise up black people or does it put them down? Now, a lot of what we call black art, in my opinion, is neo-Thomism, neo-coonery. And it is about money rather than about the ideals. But I agree with you. We have to come up with a curriculum in the public schools of this city that speak to the social, cultural, and ideological needs of black youth and of the black community. We do not have it. And black people must know about the world. It's not just us. It's the world. As Du Bois wrote in one of his books, The World and Africa. And so that's where I think we have to go. But Patrice, I think we got a lot of work to do, a lot of thinking to do. Parents must become involved. Parents must form associations where they fight for the needs of their children, but parents must know. And I guess the last thing, Du Bois talked about the teachers of teachers. Who will teach the teachers? And this is a huge problem right now. And I think what we try to do here every week is to at least bring some insights and to raise some questions in a critical way that suggests what we must do and maybe how we must go about doing this. If I could just say one thing, I know people are asking, what book am I reading from? And this is an essay in a book entitled The Education of Black People, 10 Critiques, 1906 to 1960. Again, The Education of Black People. I think you can get it on Amazon.
It's been a year, Du Bois. Thank you all for calling up. It's been an amazing show. I just want to put it on your radar, family. Instead of the typical sign-off, I want to play for you a piece of the trailer from Say Her Name. Say Her Name is a new documentary about the life and some unrevealed evidence about the Sandra Bland case. So we're going to go out that way. Say Her Name, December 3rd. So next week, we're going to be talking about the documentary, but I want you to have it on your radar. HBO documentary, Say Her Name, about Sandra Bland. And we're going to go out like that after the ad. So who's up next? Source? The Source up next. Make sure you stay tuned and stay focused.